Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Little Africa News and On the Spot, our weekly political roundup of the latest in New York politics. Today, we are joined by Leonardo Coelho, Michael Oliva, and Hank Scheinkoff. So we're going to get started because a lot of stuff has happened this week. Lots going on. But first, let me give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. We'll start first with Mr. Scheinkoff.
I'm Hank. End of discussion. No, I run a small public relations company. I've worked all over the world, and I work for presidents, heads of state, 20 successful citywide elections, I think, lots of other campaigns all over the country.
Thank you. And next, Mr. Coelho.
Hey, everyone. Hi, Mona. How are you? It's good to see you again. I'm glad I haven't worn out my welcome here yet on the spot. Leonardo Coelho, political junkie, and I guess political strategist as well, too. I'm happy to be on with everyone.
Thank you. And Mr. Oliva.
Michael Oliva, president of Sykes Global Communications, political PR consulting firm, and I've said this 6 times already, so I'm going to leave it at
that. Okay, fantastic. So let's get started. So I don't exactly know where to start because there's been so much stuff that happened this week. So we had Cuomo, who did his farewell speech. We had, Kathy Hochul broke that glass ceiling, still hearing the glass shattering. And then today she appointed her lieutenant governor. So actually, I think I'll start with today and then we'll just go back. So Hochul today announced that she has selected New York State Senator from Harlem, Brian Benjamin, as her lieutenant governor. And the response to that has been mixed. Everyone, and Hochul herself said that she will be appointing a person of color. And I guess Brian Benjamin, African American, fits that promise to New Yorkers. But people are still surprised that it's Brian Benjamin because being from upstate, understanding that she needed someone downstate to run with her. I know I'm not the only one surprised that her selection was Brian Benjamin because he just ran in the New York City comptroller race and he didn't do too well. As a matter of fact, in his district, in his Senate district, he came in third. So, my question, I'll start off with Hank. What are your thoughts? Do you think that Brian Benjamin was a good selection or should she perhaps have gone with, I don't know, Ronise Bichot in Brooklyn or Jamal Bailey or maybe even actually appointed a Latino?
It's questionable whether anybody really wanted the job because in the world in which we live in, where politicians never leave office, if you don't win in November, or it's actually November next year, you're going to be out of a job come December, and politicians in our time generally do not want to be off the payroll because that's all they got. That's the world we live in. So that's number one. Number two, I defy anybody to tell me what the name of the last 15 lieutenant governors have been. The only ones you remember are the ones who became governor who will move on to something else. Generally, they don't. And whether she has Brian Benjamin or Phineas T. Bluster as lieutenant governor, this campaign will ultimately be about her, will be about what she's accomplished or not, whether people want to retain anything that has any relationship to Andrew Cuomo, and the kind of money and television she gets on. After that, it really doesn't matter in a statewide race. And, could he be taken out in a lieutenant governor primary? Yeah, the answer is yeah, he probably could. I've done 1 or 2, I think. You can do them. He can be gone. And what does he bring particularly? He's a he's been in office for 4 years. She has hailed him as a financial expert. We'll wait and see what the TV ads look like, talking about his conflicts of interest and bad management style that was highlighted in the tabs during the controller race. So questionable choice. My betting is no one else wanted it. She would have been much better off getting someone from Brooklyn. The motherlode of votes, and particularly where the African American vote may be declining, but the Caribbean American vote is increasing, is in Brooklyn and certainly in Southeast Queens. Manhattan is declining as a locale for African Americans overall. Why? Displacement, gentrification, and the usual problems that occur when you have a neoliberal economy. But was he the best choice? No one's going to remember unless she loses. And then if she loses, they will say, aha, I told you so. This guy you could have had an LG that helped you, but this guy didn't.
Yeah, no, you make some very good points, because Brooklyn seems to be the seat of African American or Black political power right now. I want to go to Leonardo. Still talking about Hochul's appointment of Brian. The Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr. Put out a "What You Should Know." Okay, we were all expecting it to come, and and he raised a very valid point. Never in all of the discussions or the speculation was there anyone saying, it should be a Latino or a Latina from downstate. What are your thoughts on that now, knowing that she selected Brian Benjamin from Harlem, and Harlem's Black political power isn't there anymore?
In terms of it not being a Latino candidate, it's just about political strategy. I think it's just a matter of her deciding, or her team deciding what group is going to be able to bring her the most votes and stuff, right? And so the African American bloc seems to be, she figured would be a stronger block for her, and then taking into account that she's probably going to be running against an African American, either Tish or Jumaane Williams, and so figuring what she's going to be up against, it's important to think about what you're going to have as your lieutenant governor next to you, just to try to help you with what those things are. But I'll be honest with you, I don't even if she was looking to put somebody as a Latino, I'm not sure who would that person be at this level that would move the needle for her a little closer to winning that governor's race.
Interesting. Michael, one of the people being considered was Ronise, who is Assemblywoman Ronise Bishop Hermlin, who happens to also be the Kings County Democratic chair. Some people are saying that she didn't end up selecting Ronise because Ronise doesn't hold as much political power as you think she would as chair of the Brooklyn Democratic Party. And some people have pointed to, for example, that surrogate judge's race. So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that may have been a factor in Hochul not selecting Ronise because of the drama going on in Brooklyn?
Perhaps. I feel like in that race there were a lot of factors. You had the quality of the two candidates, there were money differences. In the midst of the noise of so many things going on, perhaps she sort of dropped the ball of attention after a while. I do feel, Hank taught me this a long time ago. Ethnic voting is important, but in this day and age right now, when you talk about Black voters, there's a lot of kinds of Black voters, right? There's African voters, there's African American voters, you have Caribbean voters. It just saying I'm going to pick a Black candidate doesn't necessarily give you any credibility as far as black voters. And if you do vote ethnically, and there's a Jumani and a Tish in the race, you're going to vote ethnically on top of the ticket. And if you don't vote ethnically, you're going to say, well, you know what? Who's the best candidate? Who has the best ideas? What are they saying they're going to do? So either way, it doesn't really work. And I'm not sure. I think the pick also looks a bit cynical to some people. You know, we have Afghanistan, we have the pandemic, we have the wake of Cuomo, and we're having this whole conversation over, you know, what color the pick is rather than who the best qualified candidate is. And, you know, it's just not, to me, it sort of turns off the type of primary voter who's very aware. You know?
Yeah, I think that's true, by the way. I mean, as someone, I know something about that surrogate race. I quit it a month out, as Olivia here knows. So that's to his good, because he and I have worked together and against each other. When we're together, it works out very well for him. When we're not together, it doesn't work out so well. He knows that to be true as a fact. So that being said, I think she injured herself, but I think that doesn't make the real case about that. See, the real power in New York State today is in that assembly, and it's among black women. That's where the power base is. It would have been much better having a black woman. To be really cynical about it, I would have had a woman vet in a wheelchair who was a victim of an IED, improvised explosive device in Afghanistan and Iraq, and made that the question. Why? Because she's got to do extremely well upstate. And if Zeldin's there, let's say you get in a general election, and she's got to win that primary downstate. There are enough African American, black, and Latino, Caribbean American, and African American and Latino vets and others and women who served in those conflicts. You know, and the news is pretty clear. You know, the other thing that I like to think I also taught Michael is to pay attention to the moment. There are things going on that need to be attended to when you're in a campaign. Just because you decided this is the play doesn't necessarily mean it's able to be transported down the line. So if this was and he's right, it is cynical. You pick a guy who's a financial expert who can't get things right. If you look at the clips, they're going to pound him with those from those clips. Guaranteed as sure as we're on the air. They're going to pound this guy and they're going to take her down. Well, who is they? I'm not sure yet, but there'll be a line around the block to run for governor now. There wouldn't have been necessarily until that pick. But you'll see Malone, Curry, the county executive from Nassau, Rice, the congressman will be raised. Swazi has always wanted to be the governor, so her job is to get rid of Jay Jacobs, who's Swazi's main ally, as quickly as possible before they can take over that structure. Or you'll see 5 rich guys, all told by people in my business, that the most important thing they should do is run, because those guys or women who are trying to con those rich people into running, rich men usually are very stupid, con them into running, see houses in the Hamptons, but these guys are not going to win. And the graveyard of American politics is loaded with people like that. Who else you'll see? Obviously, Tish James has got this all figured out, although it is very difficult. Andrew became the governor, became the attorney general, and then to governor, not because he had a fair fight. He fixed the attorney general's thing so Mark Green couldn't get on the ballot, made sure that Reggie Lafayette and the Westchester County Democratic Organization didn't allow that to happen. He made it nearly impossible for anybody to run against him for governor. This is not the case here. This is an open, fair, and free election with anybody who can write the check or get the money together. So you're going to see 10 people maybe until somebody calls time out. And then the legislature will intercede. The legislative leaders say, wait a second. See, this is the other thing. We got our guy as lieutenant governor, and we like her, and we don't want the hassle. And the progressives will probably tell them all to drop dead, because there's no button on people anymore. When you have one-party control, you have factionalism, and that's what you're experiencing, and that may impact on her capacity to get elected as governor, no matter who her lieutenant governor might or might not be.
So I take it most likely Working Families Party will have their candidate. I have to say though, Hank, I'm surprised at the number of people that you mentioned that could possibly run. But just focusing on Tish and Jumani, we'll start first with Tish. You don't think today's press conference, Hazel Dukes, Al Sharpton, Black Harlem coming out for Ryan is going to be a deterrent to Tish?
You're asking me? Deterrent? Mm-hmm. Please, those people were born before the last century began. What are we talking about? Who's going to turn out and vote? The average voter, the perfect voter, is a 55-year-old plus black woman in New York City. But that's not necessarily the case in the suburbs. So we're talking about an aging population, a larger population that's within that, let's say 55 plus, let's say 45 to 65, that's really going to turn out here. Young people aren't. Young people don't vote. This is absolute abject idiocy that some consultant came with to con people into spending money on things they don't need. The voters are going to turn out, but not the ones who are there. When people watch Al Sharpton on MSNBC, they don't necessarily see him in the street anymore, you know.
That's true.
Hazel Dukes, nice woman, but you know what? Give me a break. You know, it's not about age. It's about the idea. Here's the, and then I'll be quiet a bit, and I want to hear what everybody else has to say. But the idiocy of this whole thing is that if we stand up and tell people what they should do, they're going to do it, right? He didn't win in Harlem, Michael Benjamin. What are we talking about? We just had a mayoral and a controller and a public advocate race. Well, not a public advocate race, but a controller race, where people voted in segmentations based upon economics, not about race. What is clear here is there are 3 different cities: the professional class that runs Manhattan and thinks they own the place altogether, the new class which lives in the places where Black people used to live and Latin people used to live in Brooklyn and places like that, who are very, very liberal and have displaced everybody they can and created no jobs in the process. Then the third grouping are the Black and Latino blue-collar people that voted for Eric Adams, okay, because they felt very strongly about who they are. They're the people that run this city. They are the next generation of the people I came from, white, blue-collar, working-class people who ran the town and made it work and who just hated everybody because they were telling them what to do all day long. Now, so you're going to tell me, based upon that theory, that everybody's going to say, well, I said you should vote for so-and-so, therefore I'm going to do it? I'm going to tell you, drop dead. They didn't do it the last time. They didn't do it in the mayoral race. They didn't do it in the controller's race. There's nobody giving any orders anymore, except in the Army or the police department. You know, one or the other. Really.
So I got two quick points, Mona. So one, I agree with Hank. I think that, you know, this is going to be very difficult, actually, I think, for Kathy Hochul to win this, right? Because what it seems like they're bringing Brian Benjamin is to almost kind of be the talk piece towards whatever African American candidate it runs against her. And I'm sorry, you're really setting up Brian for failure if you expect him to go into African American churches and all these other places and talk bad about our first African American attorney general, like to try to convince people not to vote for her. Like, you're setting him up for a huge downfall, and I think that it's going to be very, very difficult for him to fill the role that Holcomb's team is actually looking for him to fill and stuff. Now, on the actual appointing, the theory that I have about why Brian was selected was because one of the things that people they know, but it's like it's not like the vice president and the president. They're not running on the same ticket, right? So that's one thing you have to remember. And for the novice kind of political person, they don't really see that. But you have to take that into consideration because Benjamin, Lieutenant Governor, they're running their own race. And so what my theory is that she had to find somebody that wouldn't really have their own agenda, because you could get backdoored in this. She could end up losing, and Brian could end up winning, and now you have Tish James and Brian as the lieutenant governor and the governor. So to me, I think that pick was more about putting somebody there that I don't have to when we're in the heat of the battle of the campaigns, I don't have to worry about they're going out with a whole different agenda and kind of sabotaging what we're trying to put in place and stuff. That's what I really think that selection was. But I think they're putting him in a very difficult position and kind of setting him up for failure, to be honest with you.
I think we also have to go back to the general. I mean, one of the reasons Brian didn't do well was his level of tone deafness in the race, which was, he was running Black Lives Matters type commercial, and the rest of the city was saying, no, this is what's going on right now. We want safety. We want order. And, we keep talking about Jemani, well, if it's Jemani, oh my God, we may lose. It's not just Jemani, right? The powers that be behind people like Brian and behind the Democratic establishment in the city are going to keep trying to pull in that direction, right? Like everybody's going to feel like they got to vote, they got to race everybody to the left. And that's exactly what she doesn't need to do, especially in the general election. So I do feel like that pick in general doesn't really serve her, because her biggest strength is the fact that, you can win the suburbs. She already has some connections. She did put some good groundworks in the city. She obviously comes from upstate, and, it feels like these people are running like 5 years ago. They're not running in 2021. And in that sense, strategically, I'm not sure it makes sense.
Look, it's kind of I've been a white person all my life, so I really understand how white people think. And it's one of my favorite things. White people think they see a black person, they can only have one black person, talk to all black people at all times. You can only have one Latin person, and I worked for Herman Badillo, that's how old I am. And I worked for Joe Serrano, and I worked for Freddie Ferrer, and I worked for them all in those years. They get only one Latin person can talk to all Latin people. That's how white people think, okay? Only one black person. Therefore, this is white think. Only this guy, he's black, everybody will listen to him. My view is, who cares what he has to say? The truth is, all campaigns are won by emotional statements that have credence and wind up on television, creating a bond between people in statewide races and citywide races, in my experience, which is not, unfortunately for me, limited. The problem here is how you translate that from a Michael Benjamin just got his ass whipped, right? In a citywide race, we should have been in the runoff. The people who worked on that campaign actually believed they did a good job, but the same guys also elected. You remember Mayor Miller, he was very good, and Public Advocate Joya. They don't get it. This is not about intellectual ideas. This is about emotional currency and the relationship to voters. White people don't understand that for some reason. I grew up in Hunts Point. I guess I get it differently. But it's a chip loose. It's a bad choice, bad idea, and it's going to cost her. And I think she's inherently beatable. And if I were Jumaane Williams, I'd run against Brian Benjamin in a primary and I'd whip his ass. How's that? He'd get his ass whipped. Why? Because he has whether we like his positions or not, whether this is right or left or not, it doesn't matter. This is about who can connect to the voters in the most significant fashion.
Right. And I mean, I feel like it's also a luxury to vote, based on ethnicity these days. I mean, you look at a race where, like Hank said, white working class people went with Eric Adams. You have a lot of Trumpsters going with Larry Elder in California. People are not necessarily paying attention to that stuff. They want to know what you're going to do.
No, that's true. And now, just talking about Hank bringing up that lieutenant governor race, with Jumaane already saying that he is considering running for governor, he's definitely not going to run for lieutenant governor. Any ideas on who may run for lieutenant governor, whether it's whether they're from downstate or upstate? Any speculation on that, or it's too early?
Lee Zeldin ought to pay that person money, because the more chaos there is by Democrats, the higher the probabilities of his winning. And people say, well, he can't win, Trump, this, that. Listen, let me tell you something. Crime continues to, if shootings continue to go up, and the economy continues to flatten, and the fare boxes at the MTA aren't filled, and the projections now are that we won't see any respite there for the next until fiscal 25, maybe, if we're lucky. This all continues. Hochul walks in, everybody's happy until they line up to kill her, which they're going to do already. Why? They have to blame somebody for the chaos to get around Zeldin. And when they do that, Zeldin becomes more powerful. It's better off that they have a lieutenant governor's race, that Benjamin gets beaten, where someone can get into the center and talk about what people want to hear, which is they don't want to get shot. I know liberals don't understand this, but no one likes to get shot. I can tell you. It's not a pleasant experience. They don't want to get mugged. They don't want to have homeless people living on the street in front of their houses or urinating and doing all the other things. They want people who are going to take charge of this. And you want to have that discussion. It's good, because Lee Zeldin will want to have that discussion. They'll want to see every Democrat do it. And that's the danger we face. Don't anybody who thinks that the suburbs, should crime continue, and crime is now up in Nassau County, starting to spike in Suffolk, should these things go on, that people are suddenly going to say, oh yes, I must vote for the Democrat, because I believe in the same principles as everybody who lives on 79th Street and 5th Avenue. Guess what? They don't. They don't. Simple.
No, I think with what we saw with Eric Adams' campaign is that public safety is, the number one concern. And when it comes to upstate New Yorkers and upstate voters, you tell that, like, if you want to do some fear mongering, just say that they're trying to do what De Blasio is doing in New York and bring it upstate. So with people like Brian Benjamin and folks like Jumani, I don't see him getting that type of support upstate. And if Lee Zeldin or Lee Zeldin's people are listening, they need to seriously get to getting and run someone against Brian Benjamin, and that will really, as Hank says, like, this will really make things interesting. But just speaking about Lee Zeldin, I have to say I've been watching his campaign. He seems to be getting some good advice. He's reaching out to a diverse number of communities across racial lines, demographics. He's up and down, crisscrossing the state. Even here in New York City, he's meeting with different groups. And people are starting to listen to him, and they are taking him seriously. So my question is this: do you foresee, being that even someone like Kathy Hochul over the last few years has started to veer left, like some of the other folks in the Democratic Party, November 2022, do you see downstate New Yorkers crossing that line and in that voting booth possibly voting for Zeldin in the general?
I think absolutely so. I mean, if Democrats are talking about defunding the police and what bathroom you can use and all this kind of stuff, and he's talking about property taxes, and he's talking about on the east end of Long Island, he's good on the environment, right? He's talking about jobs and they're talking about all sorts of esoteric issues, which in very good times would be more important to people, but they don't seem to be what people are really concentrating on now. And he is a great transactional politician. And what you do in DC and what you do locally may not be the same thing, right? I mean, there are so many micro issues where he has aligned with local Democrats and gotten things done for people, because he does accomplish things that are tangible. And in DC, a lot of the squad doesn't do what they say that they're going to do either. You follow your speaker or your minority leader, and policy is formulated that way. So the fact that if he acts serious and halfway sane, he's got a good shot.
I agree entirely. Listen, it's not so complicated. Mm-hmm. People in the suburbs are getting their heads banged in, right? They're spending more money. They're watching New York City they're watching New York City come back to life, which doesn't please them a tremendous amount. Crime's up, taxes are up, costs are up. They blame Democrats. Democrats now have a registration margin increase in Nassau County. Zeldin shows up. He says, I'm going to fix these things. And he wins the Orthodox Jewish vote in New York City. That's the kicker. There's 500,000 Orthodox Jews. They have a 27% as much as that turnout ratio. If he can figure out how to crack that, he wins the election, because he gets his 20% coming into New York City. Gets his 20% in New York City, he'll beat everybody upstate. You know why? Because he didn't vote for Obamacare, because he's not something that they don't want. That's the problem. The issue in our politics today, no matter where you work, what level of campaign, and we're going to go through a revolution about how this works out too, because our communication styles are changing very significantly and very rapidly. It's not about what people can be educated to think they want. So what they feel at this moment, because they're subject to being pounded with a lot of information all at the same time. It's not about thinking, it's about feeling. And if you talk to the average person, based upon what they saw with Andrew Cuomo, whether we like what he is alleged to have done or don't, at least they saw, some stability. Mm-hmm. Now they're seeing chaos. And where's the chaos coming from? One party control. And one party control always creates factionalism. It's a serious set of circumstances. I read the journalist the other day talking about how We should punish Andrew Cuomo because he allowed the Republicans to be in power in the Senate. Okay. Listen, I work for labor unions, among my many clients, labor unions, right? They liked split legislatures. You know why? Because they could get things done for their people. You think it's better since that's not the case? How you feeling? You feeling better?
No.
It goes into central Brooklyn and Queens too, right? I mean, you have Queens is more Republican than it's ever been, and it's not because of white people, right? And the trend of Black and Latino voters moving to the right for the last few cycles. You have with Caribbean Americans, you have a lot of homeowners. You have a lot of homeowners in Queens. Taxes keep going up, and this deed theft, this third-party transfer. There's all sorts of issues, and they want to talk about canceling rent as if people who pay a mortgage don't matter. And I just feel like that disconnect needs to be exploited. And you don't need to win the city, but if you make serious inroads, then that suddenly changes quickly.
I agree.
You know what? And I don't know if this may end up becoming an issue in next year's race, in the gubernatorial race. But this legislation that I understand the progressives and the socialists and lovely people like Idanis and Leonardo down there are going to be pushing the legislation. I forgot the name of the bill, Leonardo, but the one to allow non-citizens to vote in New York City. Do you see that as possibly becoming a hot issue in next year's governor race? Granted, it's only in New York City, but the fear mongering is whatever they're going to try to do in New York City, they're going to try to bring upstate. So my question to Leonardo, not trying to put you on the spot because we've had conversations about this bill, which, just full disclosure, I do not support. Do you see that as possibly becoming an issue in the race, being that, they're going to try to get it passed or moved out of committee next year again?
No, I don't see that being an issue. I think that's one. First, I think it's a downstate matter, and then I think to debunk some of that, what folks are feeling around that bill, it's not just going to be Latino residents with green cards. There are European folks that are here on green cards as well too. There's people from all over the world that are here with green cards and stuff, and so it's also giving all of those individuals the opportunity to vote as well, right? If they're getting taxed, if they have to pay taxes, there should be representation, right? And so I don't think that's going to be a huge matter that's going to impact on the governor's race, unless somebody like Udonis was running for lieutenant governor. Maybe something like that would be impactful. But no, I don't think it's going to be a huge impact on the state race like that.
Hank and Mike, what do you think? Because what happens in New York, depending on who is elected governor, they could try to, New York City, downstate, they could try to bring upstate. And with Hochul pretty much going left the last few years, and now most likely she's going to go even more left, being that she's running for re-election. You guys don't think that is something that may be brought up by, say, the Zeldin campaign or other Democrats running who don't support it? Because again, it can be passed in New York. Listen, they didn't think the green light law was going to pass. That was something that was, first downstate was pushing it, and then guess what? They introduced it on the Senate level, and eventually it got passed. Granted, when Spitzer tried to do it, it didn't work. But then, Sepulveda eventually got it done. Is this something that you think could be an issue, or you don't think that upstate voters are going to be wondering if this is a possibility, depending on who they vote for as governor?
I mean, I don't think it's just upstate voters. I mean, if there are a lot of Latino voters who did the work to become citizens, and they're going to look at it and say, so you can vote, you could work, you can receive benefits. Why did I do the right thing here? And so, I mean, in California, they had an affirmative action bill. I'm not sure if it was to end it or keep it going, and all the corporations supported it, thinking, hey, look, we're going to get all this Black and Latino support, and Black and Latino voters voted against the bill. They voted against affirmative action. So this assumption of the 5% of the population that they know what people want isn't necessarily true. So yeah, it's upstate voters, but it's voters in the city as well.
There is a great social class divide frankly leaves the poor out of the equation, and we've refused to accept that. There is no unity around and groups where poverty is part of the issue, because the poor are automatically excluded because they cost money to support, and people who work for a living really don't want to do it. I mean, they're forced to do it, and that's why in a normal country, which we're not, we would have a less regressive and more progressive tax system. We need to reform the tax code before we have a revolution in the streets. So what we've decided in New York State is we're not going to do it by normalcy. We're going to just tell people what they want, as Mike noted. Michael was exactly correct, and we're going to tell them if they don't like it, we're going to do it to them anyway. You know what ultimately they do? They either don't vote, or they riot, or they vote against you. Either they take it to the streets, they take it to the voting booth. We hope they take it to the voting booth. But the presumption that somehow everybody's going to act in a particular way because the wise people who are in government said so. Where do you see the ads that talk about how much money these people in government make? The craziness of the city councils and others. I mean, these folks are telling people what some good social policy is. They voted themselves a package that's close to $200,000 when you put it, the retirement, the health care, and all the other things involved, plus the staff. When I was a young person in this business, city council rates cost $10,000. And by the way, there was no director of communications. If I have someone from another city council office telling me I'm the director of communications, I'm going to really retch. Give me a break. In the state legislature in Alabama, where they have a lot more responsibility than the city council does, they don't have those kinds of people on every staff. This padding of the payroll and the creation of a permanent class of a politician, and throwing on top the costs of that, and throwing onto that the social mandates without discussion, are a recipe for disaster. We forget in the history of the world that fascism didn't come because people wanted to destroy liberty. They came through democracy because the political class decided that would be the way it would go. That's a basic part of history, and these things really happen. So the only way you stop that is by having diversity of opinion. And if people can't get what they want done through that diversity, they're going to take other action. It's the way history works. This democracy is a fragile one.
Yeah, I mean, and the last thing the parties are sort of switching now as far as who affiliates, right? And the last thing the Democratic Party wants is to be exposed for this sort of elite divide with working people, and that's why there is this obsession with race, because if people figure it out, and the Trump folks and the people in New York City sort of say, wait a minute, we have something in common here, and we're not going to talk about this anymore. We're going to talk about economics. It's a whole different show. In the Republican Party, look, I'm not giving them a pass whatsoever. I mean, they act crazy. So the Democrats don't have to do much. They can kind of act somewhat sane and win a lot of elections, and not really do anything that helps people economically. And I think that's the problem. And I think, if a person like Zeldin really starts to talk about that and concentrates on it like an adult, and sort of, doesn't get into the mire of sort of like all these other debates, it's a different story.
I agree. I think that's exactly accurate. Talk about things that people that pay the bucks.
Hank's point is exactly why I think that bill is important. You know why? Because, Hank mentioned poor people, right? And so the truth of the matter is that those people that would then get the right to vote if that legislation would pass, the majority are poor people, right? And so the one thing about this political system is that poor people don't have anybody to represent them. Poor people don't have unions that are in their best interests and stuff, right? Poor people don't have the voting block power that folks have and stuff. And so, you know, this is why I think a bill like that would be important, because, you know, most of the folks that are, you know, represented in unions and stuff, you know, they're able to, you know, put together a decent wage, you know, for living and stuff. Other folks can't. And so when you can't do that, how can you have impact on the folks that are representing you? How can you have a say in legislation that's being passed that's impacting you, and besides just the power of your vote? And so that's why I think that legislation is very important.
I just want to add something else about that legislation, which you know, I forgot to bring up. But that legislation, this is the thing, it also includes people who come here on work visas, and gives them the right to vote in municipal elections. It's not just people who have immigrated here or who live here that are just green card holders, but it also includes people who come here on a work visa. They can vote, they can decide what's happening, you know, in municipal government. And I don't know, I mean, it's, that part especially is a problem for many people. But like Mike said, a lot of people, a lot of, I know African immigrants, folks from the Caribbean, of course, even African Americans and other groups don't exactly support it. And you'll be surprised at how many immigrants who went through the process don't support it. But for me, my question is just, you know, is this something that the Zeldin campaign can use? Because if there's an example of something that people were talking about downstate that should happen that ended up being statewide, look at the green light law, and this is a possibility. So I'm just curious if that's going to be part of the fear mongering from anybody that's running against Hochul and Benjamin.
I don't think they have to engage in fear mongering, and I think that issue you're raising, although very important, and Leonardo's observations are really significant. We should pay attention to what he has to say, obviously. But this doesn't have to be about fear mongering. It's got to be about fairness. And if I'm Zeldin, my campaign is fairness. And by the way, aren't they crazy? And you don't touch this one. So they're really crazy. Look at the things they're doing. But then they're decent people, but they're really crazy. You know, and we're all in this together, poor, rich, black, white, yellow, mixed. It doesn't matter. And what they're doing is they're driving a wedge. They, the politicians, are driving a wedge between all of us, and that's we've got to stop. And that's why I'm the guy that says Zeldin. That's a good argument, okay? Mm-hmm. It's a derivative from the very kind of Trumpism that Republicans and Democrats are both guilty of. Populism that has a bent based upon ethnic demographic change, which is what I think what a lot of Trumpism is about. But it has its roots in campaigns that Dick Morris and Roger Stone did 40 and 50 years ago. The first campaign against immigrants was probably, in the modern era, was probably one that Dick Morris put together for a guy named Ken Hance running for United States Senate in Texas in the 80s, talking about immigrants coming over and seizing everybody, which means let's not let them rape our women and kill our children, right? Mm-hmm. That's one side of it. The Roger Stone campaigns in the industrial heartland were about resentment for the destruction of those communities and other people getting the jobs and taking over. That's what Reaganism was about, and that's what Trumpism is ultimately about as well. So there's a way to say that without saying it, and I don't think you're going to see that from Zeldin. He's got terrific people around him. John Brabender, who's an extraordinarily talented media consultant, and Tom Dunham, who is the political director for the state Senate Republicans for many years, and won campaigns and helped keep them in power. These are competent, smart people who also understand. Brabender's from Pittsburgh. He certainly understands how people with a blue collar bent feel about the world. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to take on the elites as elites. You just got to talk rationally, and you have and hoping in that if you're Zeldin to depress, not physically, but by your rhetoric and campaign, to do your best to ensure that the turnouts are not huge, because the Democrats will need that in order to get elected.
Yeah, Mona, you know the fear mongering approach would have a double-edged sword, in my opinion.
I agree.
Because if you do that, with the way how things are looking with voter suppression going around the country, and Republicans getting the label of being the party that's suppressing the votes and everything like that. If you go too hard against something like a bill like that, you can mess around and get attached to that whole moniker as well too, of being part of the establishment that's looking to suppress votes as well too.
I agree. So you put George Pataki next. You're right, Leonardo. You put George Pataki next, you say, I'm Lee Zeldin, I'm running for governor. See this man next to me? That's George Pataki. He was the governor for 12 years. And you know what we share? He was a Republican, I'm a Republican. You know what he did? He made sure that more people in New York State had health care than any other time in history. He made sure not to tamper with Medicaid formulas so that everybody would get their fair share. He sat with labor union leaders, white, black, Latino, made the state work. That's the kind of guy I am. So when they tell you who I am, don't listen to them. Listen to what George Pataki has to say. And Pataki opens his mouth. He says, that's right. I'm with Lee because we need the kind of change that'll make the state work the way it did when I was the governor. Boom. Next case, you're out of there. That's the end of the discussion.
And the environment as well. I mean, especially, people on the island, that's a big issue for them.
Right.
I spend most of my time in Zeldin's district, and if there's a swing district, this is it, right? If there's a 50, I think Trump won by a few hundred votes. Long Island Republicans tend to be centrist, especially on the state level. I mean, if you think of the Three Village area, which is Stony Brook and Setauket, which is the most probably liberal area in Suffolk, aside from like East Hampton, Ken LaValle won it many times because he knew how to moderate his message. He funded Stony Brook University, he talked about the environment. I mean, there's a message here that can work, and he can, once he is free from DC, he can actually really govern that way on the state level.
I wouldn't count him out. I think Brian Benjamin's appointment. See, Dick Ravitch was a different thing,
Yeah.
Ravitch was a real financial expert who had actually saved the city in 1975. People forget. Dick Ravitch came up with a plan that created something called PFA, the Project Finance Administration, which was the entity through which you could issue bonds required by the law through Big Mac, which was then funded by New York City pension funds. The problem is you can't use New York City pension funds to fund anything because why? Because there's too many retirees. It's called Lipitor did it. The city's financial condition is very serious. And Zeldin's going to be able to use that against the Democrats as well. The chaos that ensues without blaming New York City. See, that's the issue here. All he's got to do is win enough out-of-borough, there are not many ethics left, but enough out-of-borough people who think they're ethics or blue-collar, okay, and win the Orthodox Jews, and he wins the election. He's got that 20% in New York City right there. And Michael's right. The suburbs are really, in much of the suburbs are up for grabs. They're not crazy about the people running the place. If they were, the Senate Democrats wouldn't be worrying about about Suffolk County at all. They'd say, done deal. What do we need to spend money for?
One last question on this Hochul candidacy, because granted she's our new governor, but I just look at it as it's about her candidacy and it's just about this campaign. Earlier this week, we heard Cuomo's farewell address. Do you think some folks may try to tie Hochul to Cuomo? Because she was there, she was around during the nursing home scandals. Granted, she released the updated figures on the number of deaths in New York State. I think it's like over 10,000 more than what Cuomo had said. But the fact of the matter is she was there. So do you see any of the other candidates raising that issue that, hey, you were there all this time and you were quiet? Or you think they're just going to leave her be and not try to tie her in any way to Cuomo?
I'm not even sure that works, though, because a lot of people wanted him to stay in the job, right? I mean, Hank made a very good point. Like, who knows who the lieutenant governor is? And the only time you know is when they actually step out of line. Then all of a sudden you notice who the lieutenant governor is because he's supposed to shut up and cut ribbons. And, in many states, they run the state. I mean, if you think of the second George Bush coming from Texas as the governor, he didn't run Texas. It was a different system.
Correct.
Here, it's very ceremonial. But I'm not sure tying her to Cuomo is a negative. A lot of people weren't happy that he left. They wanted due process. They wanted to see it play out. They liked the fact that he guided us through the pandemic. So they may try to do it. Does it work? I'm not so sure.
I think Michael's right. I just don't. There are people who resent the fact that he did not. American jurisprudence requires that you be allowed to confront your accusers. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen here. That he was a tough guy. Yeah, I know he used to. I had my moments with him. I know him I know him a long time. I had good times and bad times with him. He'd call me up and threaten me. I'd hang the phone down in his ear. I mean, that's what you have to do to punks. But that being said, he's not tying her to him. Nah, you got to tie her to her, and you got to tie her to the legislature. And you put the both legislators' bodies like they are balls and chains around those knees, around those legs of her, and she'll never move. Because those guys are going to lose their minds. Why? They can't. In order to stay in power, in order to be a leader, you have to have the votes in your conference. And the more seats go to progressives, which is the trend, the more those legs get tucked to the ground. And the people who pay the bills have had enough. They've had enough.
That's a really good point about the legislature. I mean, in Leonardo's point last week about campaign finance legislation, I don't remember what it was, but they were tying some candidates to de Blasio. I think it might have been a congressional candidate, and they said, that this person supported a campaign finance bill where they take your taxpayer money and fund campaigns. And for people, even who are sort of Democrats in suburbs, that seems insane. Wait a minute, I give you my tax money to support candidates I don't like, and it's a legislative issue. And I think Hank is right. I mean, the more you forget about executive issues, go to the legislative.
I'll give you a spot right off the top of my head. You ready? It's on the tube. It's an independent expenditure. Voice comes on and says, you know what? I support bail reform because I believe that people who are not convicted of crime shouldn't be forced to remain in prison or in jail until their cases are called. It's not fair. It's not the American way. And the woman comes on. She says, I support bail reform too. My son was shot by someone who was on the street after 13 arrests. And you know who passed that law? The legislature. And you put up another woman. You put up a Jamaican-American woman, Caribbean-American woman. My son was murdered on the street, and he was shot by someone who had 20 arrests. And then you put up a woman who was raped in Brooklyn. You screen her page and say, I was raped by a guy who was released by a judge, and he had been arrested 30 times. And the voiceover comes back and says, who's going to protect New York if the legislature can't do it? They passed the law that puts people on the street no matter how many times they've been arrested and no matter how violent the crime. Don't let them get away with it. Elect Zeldin.
Ooh.
And that's why I'm Hank Shankoff. But the point is that's the argument that cuts because it takes the civil liberties argument and puts it in context. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is going to get down to.
So, Mona, going back to your question though, would that be a tactic that's going to be used tying Cuomo back to, tying her back to Cuomo? So let's not forget the Me Too movement is still a very important part, and it's very impactful on the political spectrum and stuff, right? And so there's ways to do it, Mona, without it really coming out of one of the candidates' mouths and stuff, and so there's ways. So when this is going to be such a close race that I really feel that everybody's going to be trying everything to get as many votes as possible and stuff. And so, there are going to be people and I agree with Michael where, Cuomo was very popular, even on his way out, he was very popular, but he was also, not in the best graces of a lot of women because of what he did and her being a woman. And so I don't know, I just feel like anything right now in the next, couple months, it's going to be everything. Everybody's going to throw everything on the wall and see what sticks and go from there and try to get votes from here and these different places. And somebody's going to do it. It's low hanging fruit at the end of the day to connect her, and we always, and I'm telling you, something's going to come up. There's going to be some emails that Holcomb was on that Cuomo was on as well too that are going to come out. You know, there's something's going to come up that's going to probably give that some gas, and somebody's going to use that some way somehow to keep this, you know, as crazy as possible. To be honest.
I mean, I feel like, you know, sexual harassment obviously is a very serious issue. It's disgusting, and you know what we should always like push against that. But you know, the Democrats sort of treat everybody like they need them to stay. You know, so it's like my wife, who's a very strong woman, was like, I would have told him, stop. You ain't doing that to me, and that would have been the end of the story. You know, like feminism was about empowerment, right? It was about women saying, don't want it, you know, and then it's the same thing. The reason we obsess on race over economics is because it's like, oh, we're the party that needs to save, you know. Self-empowerment is a better issue, I think, in this day and age, and I feel like Me Too is important, but it has gone through some abuse. And when it came to Joe Biden, all of a sudden it didn't matter, and the woman was crazy, and so we pick and choose where we want to apply it, right? So I do feel like, you know, it's an issue, but I don't know if it's at the forefront of everything.
Get the moving trucks. Since Kathy Hochul became governor, she said things should be better. Well, let's look. X number of thousands of people have left New York. They're left. They're not coming back. Her solution, let's just make change. We'll have reform. Well, reform isn't keeping the people here who need to pay the taxes. Here's what Lee Zeldin has to say. Boom. And that's, I mean, again, it's not about Brian Benjamin. It's not about anything. It's about her, and it's about the legislature. Because they're going to keep passing these laws, and they're going to keep doing what they do, and they're going to elect Zeldin the governor if this continues. Why? Because she is unfortunately their captive. And they intend to take control because they haven't had control. Cuomo has really smacked them around. You know, it's really simple, and they're going to have their way, and they don't care because they got Tish on the other side, and they know it.
It's also going to be interesting with next year's state races. I mean, I'm sure DSA has some candidates lined up, and the same thing for Working Families Party. So the state legislature may go even more left than it is now. It's going to be very interesting to see what's going to be happening and who's going to be running. I want to talk about the latest with de Blasio's COVID mandates here in New York City. I understand we have one lawsuit. That's Letitia Romero out of Staten Island, who's running for Staten Island Borough President. If I'm not mistaken, Nicole Maliotakis' lawsuit thrown out or something, but it's not happening. But now this week we learned that some unions are pushing back about the mandated vaccines for their members. So I understand the UFT, I think DC 37, they're saying that it's violating collective bargaining. The city hasn't sat down and had a conversation. There's been no understanding or agreements on that. So, I want to start with Leonardo. I mean, what's your opinion on the unions suing over this mandated vaccines for their members?
I mean, I think the unions have to, at the end of the day, take whatever steps they need to do to appease their members and stuff. Is it going to work? I don't think so. I think that the FDA approval at this point trumps everything. I was surprised just the other day. Yesterday, I think I heard that the CEO of Delta Airlines announced that
yes,
for those that are not, don't have the vaccination, their health insurance is going to go up $200 every month because the insurance companies are already seeing and forecasting how much it would cost for somebody to get hospitalized with COVID, and they're preparing themselves for that cost and stuff. And so, I think at the end of the day, the pressure that's going to be on folks from all different angles, from legislation being passed, mandates being passed, private sectors, unions, health sector, like all of those things. It's just going to be too much to overcome any mandates. And so the unions, they're going to do their part. They're going to put things in the court. But at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff, I don't think is going to gain any major traction.
What do you think, Mike?
Well, we had a previous discussion about whether private companies should be responsible for enforcing this. But I go back to my original point, and I'm really on the fence on this one, because I feel like people on both sides aren't being adults. It's like, what is the science? Who are the people we need to take care of, right? Who needs to be vaccinated? Who we're going to live with this thing, and I feel like on one side people need to be adults and do what they have to do, and on the other side, we can't. There's a constitution. You can't force people to do stuff. Is it unprecedented in the pandemic? No. I mean, people sometimes something so big that public policy sort of like moves a little more in the totalitarian direction. But but with the unions, it's like they represent their members. People complain about the UFT because they try to save teachers at any cost. Well, that's what they're supposed to do, and their membership is speaking out about it. They feel a certain way, and they're representing them.
Mm-hmm. Hank, you work with a lot of unions. In your experience, what do you think? Do you think that for rule this is a public health crisis? Are you surprised that the unions are pushing back? Is it because
I'm surprised that the mayor was dumb enough? I shouldn't be surprised by the things he does. So I've been all over him for the last 7 years, I guess now. But actually, I'm surprised by the dumbness of the mayor. After negotiating union contracts, they didn't get the point. You are telling people that you're changing the conditions of their work. Mm-hmm. There's a work location condition, right? You're changing, and you don't think you're going to pay for it. Why don't you get everybody in a room before being so smart and saying, by the way, let's do this together, instead of saying, to get public relations play out of it, here's what we're going to do, and wonder why the unions are going to say, wait a second, you didn't pay for the privilege of changing conditions of work, right? Mm-hmm. That's a basic part of a contract. And that's, you can't do it that way. You can, but it doesn't work out well. But, we're also not being fair to Mayor de Blasio. And I've said this a lot over the last several years. He is not a mayor. He is an extraordinarily good strategist and political consultant, and that he fills that role well. You're asking someone who can't do that to govern. He hasn't. He's had some brilliant moments. Universal pre-K, affordable housing, long-term. His behavior during the pandemic has been really good. And his behavior this year has been terrific. I mean, I'm speaking to reporters, they tell me how he's created this new era of good feeling because he's leaving, and he's stage managing his exit in a very extraordinary way because he's a great strategist and he's a great political consultant. And hopefully he'll come back to the business where he belongs. Mm-hmm. But not to know that you have to sit down with unions who represent members, as Mike noted very carefully. Michael noted that, and say, by the way, guys, I want to make a change in your work rules. So it's okay. No, what is the pay? What is the return for making that work rule change? And that's really what's at issue here. Not the ridiculousness of unions. They're doing what they're supposed to do.
No, you make a valid point, and I guess we're going to see how it's going to work out, because it may be that this is a public health crisis, and as de Blasio said, even if they don't work something out, the city and the unions, the mandate goes into effect September 27th. So it's going to be very interesting to see what's going on with that. My just quick last topic for the night, and I'm looking at the time, is national and international, and that is what's going on right now in Afghanistan. Today we learned with the attack that happened, the suicide bomber today by Kabul's airport, 11 Marines were killed and a medic. It's chaos there. Americans are upset. The world is actually upset with America because they don't believe that the Biden administration handled this withdrawal well. What are your thoughts on what's going on? And do you think this is hurting Biden? Does this make him look weak? So we'll start, Leonardo. What thoughts on this?
Yeah, Mona, first I want to send condolences out to the families of those soldiers and folks that lost their lives in Afghanistan. It was really sad news hearing about that explosion and stuff. What I'm concerned about with the Biden administration is not necessarily the withdrawal, right? Because that was going to be a difficult situation no matter what. I think the things that are happening sometimes over on this side as well too, some of the communication, some of the undercutting that's happening from, members of government here in America. I think those are going to be the things that are difficult and are going to have an impact on Biden. So for instance, I think it was like the day before yesterday, 2 members of Congress flew over to Afghanistan without the White House knowing. They just took a military plane, flew over there. The White House spokesman said he was not aware that they were going. He had to answer some tough questions from the press saying that, did it impact, the evacuation? And he had to admittedly say, yeah, there were some delays because of their arrival and stuff. That looks really bad on the administration, that 2 members of Congress, go over there. You have no idea that they're going over there. That compromised so many people's lives. That compromised so many things happened. Like, God forbid that explosion, it was horrible that it happened. But what if it would have happened during that visit? Think about the situation that would have put so many different people in security issues that would have took place after that, because now the soldiers that are there have to look at these elected officials and their safety along with everything else that's going on. It would have been an even more disaster. So I think the issues that are happening here at home are the ones that could have some more long-term effects. I think stuff at Afghanistan it was a difficult situation and it was going to go bad anyway. But I think those internal things are the things that are going to be kind of things are going to come back to bite him some way, somehow. I don't know how, but some way, somehow.
Mike?
Well, I mean, look, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Most of my family are veterans, and I feel like, the press who, they can lean to the left on everything, suddenly get very hawkish when it comes to military conflict. It's almost like, well, why are we leaving? What's happening? Because they're not fighting there, And I think it goes back to a separation between, elites. I forget the guy. I think I mentioned this last time. Who wrote "What's the Matter with Kansas?" But he said in his town in Kansas where he lives, all the rich Republicans voted Democrat this year. And it's the people who watch wars and the people who make money off of wars and the people who sort of you saw the percentage of increase in profit of these defense contractors time and time again. Bush, Obama, Trump, now Biden. They were cooking numbers, they were cooking stats to keep us in there. It does people want to kill each other, like have at it. If they want to live a life like that, have at it. I think we needed to leave. I don't think Biden's perfect. I don't think it would have worked much better under Trump. I don't think there was a good way to do this. And it's heartbreaking to me. It's heartbreaking that we lost so many lives. I don't know how. We don't even have stats on how many people there lost their lives. But clearly, if they don't want to fight a civil war, we're not going to force them to do so. And does it hurt Biden? Perhaps it does. Perhaps it does. But I think the larger issue here is, again, it's working people getting screwed of all colors. We're going over there and fighting, and they're the ones who have to die while the press pontificates on sort of like our exit strategy, as if they have any clue about what it's like. Those who go over there and report, sure, but that's not most of the people who are talking like this.
4 presidents, multiple national security personnel, CIA, multiple failures of extraordinary proportion. Mission was accomplished the day bin Laden was killed. It should have been a lot easier. You do what Harry Truman would have done after 9/11. You drop several million leaflets from the sky telling people that if they don't give you bin Laden, you turn the country to an ash. And you go home. Why? Because Americans are deluded about several things. One, they somehow have convinced themselves that they're not part of the world and that they can build nations rather than fight wars. No, the purpose, this is not, the Marshall Plan was a different deal. We rebuilt Europe for an economic reason. And so we didn't have to engage in all kinds of other activities. But since then, we've decided we're going to rebuild the world in the image of the United States. You fight a war, you reach the objective, and you go home. You don't build a nation, because when you build nations, you get soldiers killed. And that ground, that holy ground in Afghanistan, is not only filled with the U.S. Marines and airmen and people from the Navy and all, you know, and the Army. I mean, and it's filled with Polish people who are part of NATO, and every other country in NATO that served there, because the United States, for all its vainglory, is the only nation in the history of NATO that used the NATO Charter provision requiring that all the members respond to one of their members who needs assistance and requests it in wartime. This is a tragedy of extraordinary proportion. My generation won't have to deal with it, but Leonardo, you will. Because if those folks who want to bring the world into the 12th century have their way, they will come back across Europe as they did 1,000 years ago. And people in this country, with all their good intentions, will be eating grass. That's the fact. Anything happens to then the state of Israel becomes much more strategically important against Iran. Iran wants to kill all of us on this call. And frankly, will do so if given the opportunity. And the state of Israel is the only defense we have against control of the Mediterranean. Harry Truman understood the value of the Mediterranean in 1948. It was called the Truman Doctrine. Americans who think somehow this is going to disappear have lost their minds. And the Taliban will be here, not because of what Biden did today, because of what the stupidity of everybody that came before him. He's going to lose the House next year, possibly the Senate, and it will be very hard. This is more like the hostage crisis, the Iran hostage crisis, as an absolute black stain mark of, or just something that you can never get past.
Yeah, in some ways, reap what you sow. I mean, we're with the Taliban. Groups like Al Qaeda, we've been teamed up with in certain countries. I mean, the CIA and everything it does is just, it's just it's a parallel, it's a different universe to me. And the other thing is, those people, the idea that you're going to take a bunch of guys and make them into a military. I mean, these guys couldn't do jumping jacks. Like you saw the video, right? I mean, they were high. They didn't put their helmets on. The guys telling them, pick up your weapon. The tough guys were in the Taliban. Those were the people who should have been in the military. These were the normal guys, right? I mean, the idea that we were going to make them into a fighting force when anyone who would have been in a fighting force was already in the fighting force was just absurd.
Terrible. It's a terrible situation. Long-term, bad for this country. Mm-hmm. Very bad.
No, well, it is unfortunate. And Hank, you made a good point about what the U.S. did with NATO and having all of the other NATO members pretty much forcing their hand to join this war. But heartfelt, deepest condolences to the families of our military personnel. My younger brother, Qasim Davids, served tours in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So, this personally for me, my position is they need to bring them home. So we need to mind our business and focus on our backyards and front yards. But that's just my personal position on this. But gentlemen, I want to thank you so very much. Hank Scheinkopf, Michael Oliva, Leonardo Coelho, for joining us being on the spot. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more happening next week. It looks like it's going to be a very interesting political campaign cycle, not just with the governor's race, but also with the upcoming state races. I'm very curious to see who the left, the socialists, the progressives are going to start running, who they're going to target for these state races. And then, of course, once this new cohort of city council members come in, I'll be watching with my popcorn, seeing how they engage with our most likely mayor, Eric Adams. So, we're going to have a lot to talk about in the next few months, but I just want to thank you for taking the time out. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in. And we will see you next week, Thursday, 8 o'clock, right here for On the Spot. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening. Be safe and be well.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great.